Good morning, Metalheads here, and welcome to a new episode of the Metal Meltdown, and today we're looking at the latest album from Blood Incantation entitled Hidden History of the Human Race. And by fucking golly, this album better be a masterpiece because y'all have been ranting and raving about it for fucking ages now. Like, I feel like I haven't been able to go a single day surfing the metal internet without finding a single mention of Blood Incantation lately. Good for them, mind you. I mean, holy shit, this is their sophomore album and we're talking about them as if they're the next big thing in death metal. I've seen them pop up on almost every single end of the year list at this point, and they even claimed the #1 spot on Decibel Magazine's coveted top 40 albums of the year list. But hey, if you're an avid viewer of the Metal Meltdown, then you'll already know that the amount of hype surrounding an album really doesn't mean anything to me. I mean, I remember early this year, everyone was loving that Pissgrave record, and I thought it was a pile of regurgitated death metal stereotypes and bullshit, but y'all ate it up as if it was Master of Puppets Volume 2 or something. So while I acknowledge the hype, the acclaim, the hoopla surrounding this record, I nonetheless acknowledge that it is just that. The proof is ultimately in the pudding, and that I can be particularly picky regarding my pudding. With that in mind, let's just get straight to the chase here. This is not the greatest pudding of all time. It's good. It's really good. Great, even. But it's not mind-blowing. It's not the greatest pudding you're going to have this year. It's not going to rewrite pudding as we know it for the next decade. It is simply a solid batch of homemade, sweet, flavorful, well-made pudding. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with that whatsoever. Especially in a year that has delivered us so much great pudding. But this idea that it is this revolutionary, once-in-a-lifetime experience that some of you have concocted, I'm sorry, I just don't think that it's that. And I think even the guys from Blood Incantation would agree with me to a certain extent. So if you're coming into this thing expecting me to simply lavish praise on this for an uninterrupted 8 minutes and then to simply proclaim it as the album of the year, nay, the decade, then you will be surely disappointed because I'm not going to do that. Now, once again, even though this isn't a 5 out of 5 experience, in my opinion, you're still getting an incredibly well-made death metal album. Undeniably one of the best of the year. I won't argue on that end. It is certainly a standout record from the death metal horde. It is incredibly well-written, incredibly well-performed, surprisingly quite versatile and eccentric, bringing in influences and aesthetics and soundscapes from multiple aspects of the death metal spectrum, and for that matter, the broader spectrums of extreme and heavy metal music. Influences from older bands like Nocturnus, Morbid Angel, influences from some newer bands like Outer Heaven and Tomb Mold. There are influences conceptually and aesthetically from the world of prog metal as well, particularly when you get to the final 18-minute track, whose title is so long that I'm not even going to waste our time by saying the whole thing out. For the sake of simplicity, we're going to call it Awakening and leave it at that. As well as some influence from our good friend Mary Jane, as there are some arrangements on this record that are so funky, so strange, so spacey, that they could only be conjured up by somebody smoking a fuck ton of weed. But perhaps what I enjoy most about this record isn't how spacey and sci-fi-ish that the whole thing is, but rather how immediately punishing and brutal it is. I mean, right out the gate, it floors you with its concoction of death metal spices. It knocks you off your feet. Particularly when paired with its almost grind-like penchant to switch on a dime, to switch into different patterns, to switch into different segments and arrangements. Sure, you've got 4 songs here, but realistically, there's so much happening in all 4 of these songs that it's really 4 songs with all these different chapters in between. Take, for instance, opening track Slave Species of the God, which feels like the fucking freak child of Nocturnus, Napalm Death, and Gorguts with its winding, chaotic rhythms and non-stop, unfuckable energy. I mean, these 5.5 minutes alone showcase some of the most chaotic death metal of the entire year. Or for that matter, following track The Geyser Power Plant, which initially fools you by starting off on a somewhat more simplistic and even predictable barrage of death metal music, before eventually escalating and progressing into some more complicated ideas. Eventually also becoming a lot slower throughout its duration until the very end, where it almost does kind of feel like this sci-fi futuristic death doom, which is an effect that the band is clearly aiming for, and they even capitalize on in the following track, Inner Paths to Outer Space, which almost becomes quite cinematic as it grows and expands from these minimalistic sci-fi spacey soundscapes into this grand proggy death metal slammer. And this is all without addressing the aforementioned Awakening, the 18-minute slammer that takes up literally half of the record. There's so much going on in this track that talking about it kind of feels like spoiling a good chapter in a good book, and I don't really want to do that. Plus, more importantly, we just don't have the time to do that. So just trust me when I say that this one track alone will deliver all of the death metal goodies you need for the rest of this year, leading into the next year, for that matter. So it sounds awesome, right? Like, it sounds like an incredibly enjoyable, flexible, versatile, and surprising slew of death metal. Why aren't I giving this a 5 out of 5? Well, one, because my 5 out of 5 is different from your 5 out of 5. Most people's 5 out of 5 is like, this riff is good, and I love it, 5 out of 5. My 5 out of 5 means there's an emotional connection going on here, so this was never going to get one regardless, because let's be honest, this kind of death metal is not exactly going to elicit that kind of reaction unless it delves into some literally Star Wars-esque territory. More importantly, there were just a lot of little issues that prevent me from giving this the insane level of praise that I see it. For one, the vocals, which are by no means incompetently performed, but are somewhat one-dimensional when compared to the incredibly extravagant and versatile and dynamic arrangements that we see across the rest of the record. I mean, there's some seriously fantastic death metal songwriting and performances here, and the vocals are just so basic. They're so bland. They don't offer anything new. A more unique vocal style could have done so much to make this feel so much more powerful, and instead what we've got here is the same kind of vocal performance that you see on any average death metal record. I also think that weirdly, despite the album's short length, there's honestly some fat that needs to be trimmed. There are a lot of spacey segments that I think are stretched on for too long, and a lot of segments that tend to repeat themselves, and you begin to lose the effect of everything. I mean, hey, at the end of the day, it still wraps up at a pretty sharp 36 minutes. We're not dealing with anything particularly bloated or pretentious here, but it's just these little issues that prevent me from, pushing it, elevating it to the level that so many people are. That being said, I feel more than confident saying that this is, nonetheless, one of the stronger death metal releases that has come out in 2019. And that's saying a lot, because we have had some seriously fantastic death metal so far this year. Anyone who has been tracking death metal in 2019 will be able to tell you it's been a seriously fucking great year for the genre. I'm going to give this a highly enthusiastic 4 out of 5. If you're a death metal nerd, if you're an extreme metal nerd, and everything I've talked about sounds amazing to you, then guess what? You're going to have an amazing fucking time. If you're one of the people that's been overhyping this record and just been going nuts over it beforehand, you're gonna love this record. And for that matter, if you're brand new to the genre, I'd be willing to show this to you, because this record does a really great job at showing just how insane and incredible this can be without stumbling too far into cliches and stereotypes, and also without being super overtly overwhelming. So yeah, not my album of the year, not my favorite death metal album of 2019, but hey, if I'm in the minority on that, so be it. And even in the minority, I'm more than willing to acknowledge how incredibly well put together and just plain fun this whole thing is. So, highly enthusiastic, 4 out of 5. Definitely check this out. And that is it for the Metal Meltdown. I'm not an expert, nor do I claim to be, so what do you think? Do you like this record? Do you not like this record? And what do you want to hear from me next? And thank you for watching. Make sure you press subscribe so you get updates on the Metal Meltdown fucking immediately. And you have yourself a fantastic fucking day.